following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and our big focus continues to be on the Israel-Hamas war. Well, today is a very significant day for both Israelis and Palestinians as a 4-day truce in the Gaza Strip kicks in and the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners finally begins. The temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is the first respite in 48 days of conflict that has devastated the Palestinian enclave. Both sides have categorically stated, though, that the war is far from over. No big bombings, artillery strikes or rocket attacks have been reported today, although Hamas and Israel have accused each other of sporadic shootings and other violations. The ceasefire, which began at 7 a.m. local time, involves the release on day one of 13 Israeli women and children held hostage by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. In fact, the Prime Minister of Thailand has just confirmed that 13 Thai nationals who were being held hostage by Hamas have just been released. Additional aid is also scheduled to flow into Gaza, which has been in the grip of an unimaginable humanitarian crisis on account of weeks of Israeli bombardment, followed by a ground assault that have killed thousands of Palestinians in Khan Yunis town in southern Gaza that is currently housing thousands of families displaced from the north. There were scenes of streets filled with people finally venturing out of their homes and shelters. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said this will be a short pause, at the conclusion of which the war will continue with great might and generate pressure for the return of more hostages. As part of the current deal, 50 hostages who were taken captive from Israel during the 7th October attacks will be released over 4 days in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners, mostly women and children, from Israeli jails. The Israeli military has told Palestinians not to try and return to their homes in northern Gaza, which they describe as a dangerous war zone. The temporary ceasefire came about amid international concern over the fate of the hostages and the plight of Palestinian civilians trapped in Gaza. Despite growing international pressure, Israel has rejected calls for a full ceasefire, saying it would only benefit Hamas, a position backed by the United States. The first batch of hostages being released today include women and children, with the total number rising to 50 over 4 days. The hostages are being released to the Red Cross and an Egyptian security delegation that traveled to Gaza. They will then be brought out through Egypt for transfer to Israel. After the reception and any initial medical treatment, the hostages will be transferred to hospitals to be reunited with their families. In exchange, Israel is releasing 39 Palestinian prisoners today. These are 24 women and 15 teenagers in the occupied West Bank. Israel says the ceasefire could be extended beyond the initial 4 days if Hamas continues to release hostages at a rate of at least 10 per day. Under the agreement, desperately needed aid has also begun to be delivered to Gaza. Some of the first trucks to enter carried banners that said "Together for Humanity" and "For Our Brothers in Gaza." Egypt has said 130,000 litres of diesel and 4 trucks of gas will be delivered daily to Gaza, and 200 trucks of aid would enter Gaza every day. In the midst of this, some Palestinians who had been abroad when the war broke out have used the truce as the opportunity to return to the Gaza Strip. Remember, Israel launched its assault on Gaza after Hamas fighters burst across the border fence into southern Israel on the 7th of October, killing 1,200 people and seizing about 240 hostages. Since then, Israel has rained bombs on Hamas-ruled Gaza, killing some 14,000 Palestinians, around 40% of whom were children, according to Palestinian health health authorities. Hundreds of thousands of Gaza's 2.3 million people have fled their homes to escape the violence under relentless aerial strikes, with food, drinking water, fuel and other basic supplies running desperately short. This is the bloodiest episode in the long-running Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel says this war will not end till it has wiped Hamas off the face of the planet. The question is, will the truce hold for 4 days as agreed between the two sides? Does the temporary truce hold out hope for an extended one? How much relief will this 4-day period offer the beleaguered Palestinians trapped in the Gaza Strip? Can we hope to see all the 240 hostages being set free in due course? Does this truce in any way mean that a complete ceasefire is now at least in the realm of possibility in the foreseeable future, or are we still looking at a long drawn-out war?
Will start the minute Israel receives its prisoner at Rafah crossing. The prison authority will hand over the male and female prisoners expected to be released to the Red Cross. The process will happen here in Ophir military camp. All the 150 prisoners who are listed to be released are from Jerusalem and the West Bank. Therefore, the first batch is 39, including 24 female and 15 minor prisoners from Jerusalem and the West Bank.
The United Nations can confirm that, as I speak, trucks with humanitarian supplies continues to cross into Gaza through the Rafah crossing point. We hope the agreement between Israel and Hamas, now in force, will bring respite to the people of Gaza and Israel, and some relief to the hostages and detainees who will be released, and to their families. We hope it allows grieving families to honor their dead and bury them with dignity. And we hope that this humanitarian pause leads to a longer-term humanitarian ceasefire for the benefit of the people of Gaza, Israel, and beyond. Yesterday, we had 80 trucks with humanitarian relief that crossed the border. There was some 68,000 liters of fuel in addition to the 80 trucks with relief. So we do it once it's established inside Gaza. The pipeline is quite long for relief, and parts of it, a lot of it, in fact, is beyond our control and has to do with verification of the consignments. We have, of course, seen what the Israelis have been saying about movements, also about movements of convoys, and so on and so forth. We proceed on the basis of the hope and the expectation that we will reach people in need where they are. Whether that happens, obviously, I cannot tell you now. But the operation, of course, wants to see that happen. That is the whole purpose of it, from our point of view.
All right. So, as I said, this is a big day for both Israelis and Palestinians, with that 4-day truce finally taking effect, and the release of hostages has begun. As we said, the news that we have for you at this point is that 13 Thai hostages and, I beg your pardon, 12 Thai hostages and 13 Israeli hostages have been released. They're currently on their way to Rafah in Egypt. Let's get a lowdown on what exactly is happening and expected to happen over the next 3 days from our panel of experts. Joining me on the show tonight, Annette Bernstein-Reich, President of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce, Professor Uriel Abuluf at the School of Political Science, Government and International Affairs, joining us live from Tel Aviv, and Dr. Aaron Lerman, Vice President, Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. All our 3 guests joining us from Israel tonight. Welcome to Global Lens. Annette, can I start with you? The information that we are getting at the moment is that 13 Israelis and 12 Thai nationals who were being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza are currently on their way to Rafah in Egypt, through which they will then be taken to Israel. Can you confirm that for us? And therefore, would it be correct to say that the total number of hostages being released today is actually 25?
Totally right, Neha. Good evening to you. Yes, the Israeli news presently confirms that the Israeli hostages are already in Rafah crossing, and before that, even the 12 Thai workers were released and handed to to the Egyptian. So we are expecting all the 25 people hostages to be sent to Israel very soon. I guess that in the next 1 hour we will be able to see more of that.
I have to say, Anna, that this is great news, not just for Israel, not just for the anxious families of the hostages who are finally on their way back home, but in fact for the entire world that has been praying for their safety for the last 7 weeks. So, Anna, let me ask you this. Currently, what we have in place in Gaza, as per the agreement between Israel and Hamas, is a 4-day truce. Under this agreement, 150 Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails are going to be released in exchange for 50 hostages who were taken from Israel by Hamas on the 7th of October. My question to you is, how hopeful or optimistic are you that this 4-day truce is going to indeed hold and that the release of hostages will go off smoothly? Because again, we're all keeping our fingers crossed, we're all hoping it goes well.
So just let me correct you, Neha, that when we're talking about 50 hostages, those are 50 Israelis. In addition to the 50 Israelis, we're expecting to get more hostages of the Thai workers. As I said, 12 today, and additional workers are in Gaza, and we hope that they will be released as well. As to your question about whether this ceasefire will be maintained, if it's up to Israel, definitely it will be maintained, because we really want to see all the children back in Israel. Those 50 will be, as you rightly said, young children with their mothers. The intention is to have families released together, not including the fathers. And this is a very sad part of this deal. But it's more than that. It's not just those 4 days. The agreement says that it will be extended if the Hamas are able to release more in a ratio of 10, as you actually said it earlier, 10 per day. The ceasefire will continue. We would continue this ceasefire until, and I told it to you last time, until all the hostages are released. And we are praying, and you should see the streets of Israel. No one is out. All of us are watching the television, crossing fingers to see the kids. And you know what? It's now 49 days. We know each hostage by name. And when I see the redhead, Akfir and Ariel Bibas, I will be so happy, because we were waiting for them for so long. And I hope that by the end of our program today, we will be able to get confirmation who was released, and hoping, praying that all are safe and back to their families.
Amen to that. That's what we're all hoping and praying for. And you've shared some important information with us, Annette. You're saying that when we are talking about the deal that's been struck, it's for the release of 50 Israeli hostages plus some foreign nationals. 12 Thai nationals have already been released, and we've also been told by the Americans that at least 3 American hostages will be released as well during this period. And of course, you're right in pointing out that Israel has made it clear, for every 10 additional hostages that Hamas agrees to release, there will be 1 extra day of ceasefire. So Dr. Aaron Lerman, let me come to you now. Again, fingers crossed, things have gone well on day 1. We have 3 more days to go as far as the full implementation of this particular agreement is concerned. How optimistic are you that this deal will be implemented smoothly without any hiccups, that the ceasefire will indeed hold? And how much of an incentive is this offer from Israel likely to be for Hamas that you give us another 10 hostages and we'll give you another day of ceasefire?
Well, clearly for Hamas it was important to, let's say, delay the ongoing onslaught of Israeli military capabilities in Gaza. I think it's less about the release of the prisoners and more about providing the Hamas leadership with a possibility of, let's say, reconnecting with their command structures, preparing for the next stage of fighting, and in their mind, possibly trying to create a situation where Israel would find it increasingly difficult to pursue its campaign. Therefore, there is tension in Israel, and the government felt obliged to make it very clear to the Israeli people that the campaign to dismantle Hamas control in Gaza will continue once the truce or the pause, I should say more carefully, expires. And a few more days will not change that, as the likelihood of a more comprehensive deal for the release of the rest of the hostages seems quite remote at this stage. I think Hamas did understand at some point that they can utilize their brutal capture of children and women for a temporary pause, and that is what they decided to do. But beyond that, the war is far from over.
The war is far from over. Both sides have made it clear. Hamas has said it. Israel has said it. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has once again said, make no mistake, we will continue this war till Hamas is finished. This is just a temporary truce. Professor Abulaf, let me come to you. There is no doubt that the release of hostages has been welcomed by the entire world. It's a matter of huge relief for everyone. But as Dr. Lerman mentions there are some concerns, especially in Israel, with many arguing that this truce gives Hamas the opportunity to regroup. On the other hand, there is this incentive offered by Israel. You give us more hostages, we'll probably give you more days of truce. Which side of the debate or fence are you on? Do you have that concern that this may well be an opportunity for Hamas to regroup, or do you actually believe that given this is the first truce we've seen in this near 50-day war, we could actually be looking at a window for maybe a longer truce, a more extended one? What is your take?
Well, I think there is no doubt whatsoever that Hamas will be using the truce in order to regroup and in order to better fight Israel once the war is reinitiated. There is no doubt about that. But I think morally speaking, at least in my mind, it's very clear that it is the role of the soldiers to protect civilians and not the other way around. And so even if the result of the ceasefire, whether it lasts for 4 days or for 10 days, and according to the agreement, 10 days is the maximum for this ceasefire, even if it lasts for 10 days, and then the result of that is higher casualties to the IDF, to the Israel Defense Force, then I would still favor what we are seeing now, because the top priority should be to protect civilians. And by the way, civilians on both sides. I think, morally speaking, that is the right principle to guide us.
All right, this is interesting. This is a complex situation, obviously. You've made a nuanced argument that there is a price to be paid either way, but you would rather see the soldiers pay that price and not civilians. That's a very interesting point you're making. So let me go back to Anat at this point. Anat, how likely, in your assessment, is Hamas to take up Israel on the offer that you give us another 10 hostages and we give you another day of truce? Because Dr. Lerman is skeptical. He says Hamas may have for now agreed to release 50 Israeli hostages and 12 Thai hostages. This gives them an opportunity to regroup, but it's very unlikely that they will want to release all the hostages. And we're talking about 240 people. That's a huge number. What is your take on that?
My take on that, there might be that many of the hostages are not held by Hamas themselves. And we know that the Islamic Jihad is holding some of the hostages. We know that the mob that entered Israel during October 7 took hostages, and the hostages are scattered, not necessarily held by the Hamas people. So as Hamas said, we'll have to collect the hostages. So that's part of their mission in the upcoming days, to really find where are the Israeli hostages. It's not very clear. In this 4 days, they will be releasing hostages that are being kept by themselves, but it will take time for them to find more hostages. So if they want, I guess that they will be able to find what they want. They still have power in Gaza. But the question, if they want a ceasefire, I think that they will see how they rearm during those upcoming days, and then they will evaluate what's next. We all cross fingers, as I said, that they'll find as many hostages as possible, and we will have this ceasefire as long as possible. This is the Israeli mindset. That's what we want, but you need two to tango. I don't want to tango with Hamas, but that's who we dance at the moment.
That's who you're dealing with. Well, I have an update for you and for our viewers, Annette, and this is good news. News agency AFP has just reported that Israeli hostages, the 50 Israeli hostages that we've been talking about, have been handed over to the Red Cross. For weeks now, Israel had been saying, give access to the Red Cross to go and meet these people. Hamas wouldn't allow it. Now, they've been officially handed over to the Red Cross, and now through the Red Cross, they are going to be handed over to Israeli authorities. Can you quickly tell us, Annette, about the entire protocol involved in this process? Like I said, great news. If AFP is correct, those 50 Israelis are now safe. They are in the custody of the safety of the Red Cross. What more can you tell us?
Now, I'm watching in parallel the Israeli television while talking to you, and the Israeli television says that 13, not the entire 50, 13 were handed to Red Cross. I'm not able to get now more news. The 13 is definitely a good sign that they are with the Red Cross. It means that the deal is progressing as planned. The prisoners from Israel, the Palestinian prisoners, we saw them being released and moved from their jails. And there will be, from the Red Cross, the Israelis will drive to Air Force in south of Israel. Over there, they will be met first, and then they will be sent to hospitals, as you rightly said. But I don't see news about 50. I see news about the 13, as originally we have seen.
You're right, Annette. I stand corrected, because 50 is a number that we are hoping to see released in 4 days. Today, yes, we are looking at 13. You're absolutely right. I stand corrected. 12 Thai nationals have been released by Hamas. This has been announced by the Thai Prime Minister. And 13 Israeli hostages have been released as part of the first batch. Dr. Lerman, your thoughts on this? We believe they are now with the Red Cross, these 13 Israelis. They are going to be taken to hospitals that are on standby. Right. Of course, one can't even imagine what state they might be in, physical, mental and emotional state. But the good news is they are going to be back home with their loved ones very soon. Your thoughts on this development, sir?
Well, not all of them will be reunited with their loved ones, because their loved ones have been murdered in some cases.
Yes.
And we don't even know whether these children are aware that they've been orphaned by Hamas. But all of this would require the most delicate and careful attention of professionals supporting them and their families. And of course, this is why in the hospitals they will be kept away from the prying eyes of the media. I appreciate the importance of the media, but right now this is not what they need. I will point out another interesting aspect of what happened. Somewhat, not to our surprise, but not exactly as originally planned, it is the Egyptian government which basically handled the handover in order to basically assert their role. The negotiations were largely conducted with the involvement of the Qatari government, but it is Egypt which positioned itself now to arrange for the actual release. And I think this foreshadows an Egyptian role down the road in the day after, which Israel understands to be an important aspect of the realities that will emerge when the war is over and Hamas is no longer in government in Gaza.
You make a very important point there, sir, because, you know, the Gaza enclave, as we know, is surrounded by Israel, by Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, we know for a fact that Egypt has refused to take any refugees, but the humanitarian aid has been coming in from there. It has played a crucial role in these negotiations for the release of the hostages, whether it's Egypt or Qatar, the United States. Apart from Israel and Hamas, multiple players have played a role. But you're right, Egypt will probably have a key role even going forward, as questions are repeatedly asked about what happens once Hamas is, let's say, eliminated by Israel. There cannot be a vacuum in Gaza. Somebody will need to step in. What role can other Arab countries like Egypt play? But Professor Abuluf, let me come to you at this point. 13 Israelis, as we speak, are in the protection of the Red Cross, having been released from Gaza by the Hamas terrorists. We are not sure how soon they will reach Israel, but they are, of course, going to be taken to hospital first for treatment. And then, like I said, we don't know what state they're in, physically, mentally, emotionally. Obviously, this must have been the most traumatic experience of their entire lives. But it would be correct to assume that at the first given opportunity, the Israeli officials will want to debrief them?
I imagine so, although when we speak about children, I don't think that it's anywhere even close to the top priority.
Okay, though there are women too. There are women and children who are being released today.
Right. I imagine that Israel will try at a certain point to have as much information as possible from those who were held hostages. I'm not sure to what extent that will be so beneficial to the effort to keep on releasing other hostages. Israel has obviously been working at it for the past 50 days. I don't think that this is the crucial aspect here. The key element is their well-being. And I would like to add something else regarding the previous question.
Go ahead, please go ahead.
I think it's important to note what, according at least to a recent report, Sisi, Egyptian president, just said, which is that he endorses a demilitarized Palestine to establish a Palestinian state over both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which will be demilitarized, and that will be ensured by international, especially NATO and US forces, and including forces from Arab armies. This is important. This is important progress on another plane, which will be crucial in order to eventually resolve not just the clash now over Gaza, but the overall Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, as I told you several times before in our meetings, I think a precondition for all of that will be to effectively remove Hamas government from the Gaza Strip.
All right, Annette, let's discuss that. Even though, you know, today one's mind is focused in a sense on the hostages, because finally there is some good news. After this very dark period that we've seen over the last 49 days with so many people dying on both sides, finally some good news to cheer everyone up. You know, even as we wait for these people to be taken back to Israel, to be taken to hospital for medical treatment, to be reunited with their families, and for the remaining hostages to be released over the next few days, the remaining of the 50 that we've discussed. You know, there are already questions being asked about what this war is going to look like, let's say 4 days from now, once the period of this truce is over. We don't know, of course, whether Hamas will agree immediately to release more hostages. How do you see things panning out over the next few days and weeks? Because there are some who, despite Hamas and Israel saying we are going back to fighting 4 days from now, you know, there are those who say, but come on, you know, if we can see this finally happening, this day finally coming after 49 days, then maybe, just maybe, there is a small window of hope or opportunity for some sort of an extended truce, if not a complete ceasefire?
I wish there was a complete ceasefire. We need first all the hostages back. I mean, we cannot maintain a ceasefire without seeing all the 238 hostages being released. And Hamas need to disarm. I mean, the war, unfortunately, I mean, we're not happy with this war. We lose a lot of people during the war, and with each soldier that dies, our heart breaks. But we must disarm Hamas, and if Hamas will, after this ceasefire, say, okay, we're moving out, then there is no war, definitely. But you know, you and me know that it will not happen. So it's the interest of the entire world, it's not just Israel interest, that we disarm Hamas and bring peace to the Gaza Strip, and of course to Israel. So this is the stand of Israel. We hope to have an extended ceasefire because it means more hostages are being released. And if, although they said 10 days, if every day they'll bring back another 10 hostages, I can guarantee you that the ceasefire will continue. But I guess that will not be the case.
You don't believe that will be the case? You don't believe Hamas has the will to release all the hostages? But let me ask you, do you share the concern that, let's say, Dr. Lerman has, that many others have, who say that, you know, it could actually get tougher for Israel to, in a sense, get back into the war if, let's say, there is a 10-day period, because Hamas would have regrouped and rearmed. Though, you know, I must say Professor Abulov has a very interesting take. He says it is the duty of the soldiers to protect civilians. So he'd rather see soldiers sacrifice themselves than civilians be sacrificed in this war. Is that a concern that you have? And how do you think Israel is likely to address it?
I think that Professor Abulov referred to preferring the Israeli civilians over the Israeli soldiers.
Yes, exactly. That's what I meant.
Okay, but we also care about the Gazan civilians. Don't be mistaken. We care about them a great deal, and we don't want to hurt anyone. This war, and we're back to our previous discussions, Hamas use very cynically their own people as human shields. We want the babies, they put the babies in front of them as a shield. So it's asymmetric war between an army that works along international war laws to a terror group that uses cynical it's a civilian. So it's not an even war. It's very unfortunate. But that's the situation now. And we will have to continue the war. Unfortunately, I mean, we no one wants war. I mean, this is not a normal situation, and we are peace-seeking people. We want to do our startup nation. We want to do our technologies. We want to live in peace. We have no interest to occupy Gaza. We have no interest in this war. We have no interest in hurting any civilians. We just want it to be end. And I think that Israel wants it to end even quicker than anyone, because we suffer. It hurts our economy. Many soldiers are dead. This is not a situation that any nation would want to be in. And we say it in Arabic, inshallah, this war will be over soon.
Inshallah. We all need to see that. The world is waiting with bated breath to see an end to this war. Dr. Lerman, let's for a moment look at what the future of Gaza could look like. You mentioned the role that a country like Egypt could play. It's already played a crucial role in these negotiations for the release of the hostages. All the aid is being delivered via Egypt. Let's say Israel does manage to completely eliminate Hamas from Gaza, and it has made it clear that it's not interested in reoccupying the Gaza Strip. The question then is, what role can countries like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, other parts of the Arab world play in a post-Hamas scenario? Because I think we can all agree that there cannot be a vacuum, a political and security vacuum in Gaza. And the question I basically want to ask is, what do you think would be an acceptable alternative to Hamas as far as Israel is concerned?
Okay, Neha, and with your permission, this will be my last answer, because I need to leave.
Sure, sir.
There are all sorts of scenarios being considered. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority, as currently constituted, even as President Biden said, it needs to be revitalized. And ultimately, it may be in a position to manage a post-war Gaza. But right now, it is insufficiently organized even to control effectively the areas under its direct rule, let alone manage this immense task. Israel has no intention of staying in Gaza, although there are some Israelis who have fantasies of that nature. Some of them are even, within the government, but this is not what the government leadership is going to authorize. We are looking for ways to be to have our presence there replaced. I don't think the Egyptians would want to actually govern Gaza directly. But Arab countries, as well as others, may create an international group that would manage and authorize a transition period during which there will be both reconstruction and reordering and the emergence of an effective local leadership that will then decide what is their future. And whether they prefer to be reunited with the authorities in Ramallah or have other options chosen. But it would be a long, I would say, I assume, in terms of years, not months, transition period in which this reconstruction effort will create a completely new reality in Gaza, and as President Sisi said, a disarmed reality that will no longer pose a threat to Israel generally, and specifically to the Israelis who would come back to live in the communities from which the hostages were abducted and in which so many people were brutally murdered on October 7th. And with that, with your permission.
Absolutely.
Thank you for letting me.
Dr. Lerman, you've been kind with your time. Thank you very much for joining us. We will let you go, sir. Let me take closing remarks now from my other two guests. Professor Abuluf, let me ask you this question. What is the period of transition in Gaza likely to look like in your view? What could the new reality of Gaza look like?
That's an excellent question. It's one of the most important one at this point. I think that we should take advantage of the next couple of days. If ceasefire indeed holds, we should use that ceasefire also to introspect, to self-reflect. I think what we have witnessed over the past 50 days is a failure, a military failure definitely of Israel on October 7, allowing this attack, but also a moral failure of many people in the international community. And I think it's time for all of us to self-reflect, to be critical of the views that we've harbored before and throughout those months and a half. Now, as to the future, I think it should be geared towards an eventual solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, 2 states for 2 peoples. The newly independent Palestine should be a demilitarized state. I think there are enough Israelis and enough Palestinians who, if they see that peace is indeed possible, will be opting for that. The main hurdle, the main challenge is to rebuild trust between the peoples, to realize that in one way or another, both peoples have been hostages by the radical leaders. And it's time for those people who would like to see coexistence between the 2 nations to come together. This is possible. It will take a lot of effort. It will take financial effort, political effort, military effort as well. Hamas, for example, could not have been eradicated without the Israeli military intervening. No outside force would do that work for us, and certainly not the Palestinian Authority that, correctly remarked before, is not strong enough and it's not legitimate enough in the eyes of many Palestinians. So that task of creating popular legitimacy for responsible leadership and for peace is the main task after the war ends, but there is still a long way to go because right now it doesn't seem like Hamas would be willing to yield. The overall plan of Hamas is basically to destroy the Jewish state, to destroy the state of Israel. You know, just 2 years before the October 7 attack, they've held a vast conference imagining the day after Israel is destroyed, suggesting, for example, that some Jews will be exterminated, other Jews will be expelled, still other will be coerced into forced labor. This is the sort of organization that Israel has been dealing with, and this is the challenge and the moral, not just the practical challenge, that the whole international community should be facing now in that 4 or perhaps more days that we have to try to clear our mind and rethink what has happened.
All right. We see a very animated defense minister. You have Gallant there in those pictures that have come out. This is soon after news came in that 13 Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas and handed over to the International Committee of the Red Cross. We saw you have Gallant there addressing the media. We will try and get for you more details of what he said there. And last word to you, you know, as we see how things pan out over the next few days, and we want to see those hostages return home safely. But looking ahead into the future, I've asked my Israeli guests on this show before, so I'll ask you this question. Does the Palestinian Authority look like an acceptable alternative to Hamas? And again, once Hamas, let's say, has been eliminated, what do you still do about factors like the Hezbollah and Iran, which is a very big player in the region, which many of you believe orchestrated 7th October in the first place? Could you unmute yourself, Anna?
Yes, sure. I'm saying that the problems will not be over once we get rid of Hamas, because eventually the puppeteer is actually in Iran, and they are managing Hamas, and they are managing Hezbollah, and they're even managing the Houthis in Yemen. And we are still facing mortars and missiles and rockets coming from the north border and even from Yemen, from Syria and Lebanon. So the situation, we need to look at this in totality. But if we are looking at the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian authorities, you're right, the Palestinian authorities doesn't have consensus or support in the Gaza Strip at the moment. We need to remember also that the Islamic Jihad is there, which don't see eye to eye with the Palestinian authorities headed by Abu Mazen. However, that's, I say usually that's the less of two evils. And once the Palestinian Authority take some responsibility in Gaza, they'll have to get some assistance from Egypt, from Qatar, from UAE, from Israel in certain senses. But I don't see any other organization that is able to manage the strip, but some combination which includes forces or nations like Dr. Lerner mentioned, or the Palestinian authorities joining forces to work in Gaza post Hamas life. And I really hope to be in this situation to really talk about it and know that Hamas is no more. I mean, we're talking about it. It will take some time for this scenario to really happen.
In fact, Dr. Lerman said something interesting. He said this period of transition itself could last several years. So really, we are discussing some very, very complex issues here, even as Israel and Hamas continue to be in the middle of a war marked by, as of now, just a 4-day truce. But like I said, finally some good news after a very dark 50-day period. Good news not just for Israel, good news for the world. On that note, Annette Bernstein-Reich, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me once again on Global Lens. I look forward to having you back. Professor Uriel Abalouf, thank you very much for your time and perspective. I look forward to talking to you again. And once again, our thanks to Dr. Erin Lerman, who was with us earlier on the show. Well, on that note, let's now get you an update from here in India. And this is pertaining to our neighbor Afghanistan. It's been 2 years since the Taliban regained control in Afghanistan, marking sweeping changes across the country's social political landscape. This period has witnessed tragic and life-altering changes in various aspects of Afghan society, whether it is the lives of the Afghan people, especially women, or matters pertaining to governance, human rights and international rights. Today, in a major development, the Afghan embassy in New Delhi announced its permanent closure, citing persistent challenges from the Indian government. The Afghan embassy stated that the decision to close its diplomatic mission came after an earlier cessation of operations on the 30th of September. The statement says the decision follows the embassy's earlier cessation of operations on the 30th of September, a move made in the hope that the Indian government's stance will favorably change to let the mission operate normally. The embassy also stated that it was cognizant that some might attempt to label this move as an internal conflict involving diplomats who switched allegiance to the Taliban, but this is a decision which is a result of broader changes in policy and interests. It goes on to say, given the constant pressure from both the Taliban and the Indian government to relinquish control, the embassy faced a difficult choice. India has been a steadfast strategic partner of the erstwhile Afghan Republic since 2001, and we acknowledge the limitations and concerns that govern the realm of realpolitik and the balancing act required at a difficult time in a geopolitically sensitive region. Thanking the Afghan citizens in India for their understanding and support, the embassy said that despite the limitations in resources and power, they always work tirelessly for the betterment of their people, even in the absence of a legitimate government in Kabul. This closure marks the end of Afghanistan's presence in India. All their diplomats have left, leaving behind only the Taliban-affiliated diplomats who essentially attend online meetings. Earlier, the Afghan embassy had made several requests to the Indian government, urging it to take custody of the Afghan diplomatic properties, bank accounts and vehicles, along with the $500,000 in the embassy's bank account. Afghan refugees, students and traders in India have decreased in numbers since August 2021, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. New Delhi has issued limited new visas to Afghan nationals during this period. In its statement, the Afghan embassy also said, unfortunately, efforts have been made to tarnish our image and hinder diplomatic efforts in order to justify the presence and work of Taliban-appointed and affiliated diplomats. In the face of these challenges, our committed team worked diligently in the most difficult circumstances, prioritizing the interests of the 40 million Afghans in every possible sphere, from securing humanitarian aid and online education scholarships to facilitating ease in trade and advocating for the formation of a broad-based government. Remember, the diplomatic personnel at the Afghan embassy in New Delhi had been appointed by the then Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, who fled Afghanistan when the Taliban took over. These diplomats had refused to recognize the Taliban regime and rejected the militia's demand that they quit their posts. India has not officially recognized the Taliban government in Afghanistan. New Delhi had established diplomatic ties with the democratically elected government of Afghanistan back in 2001 after the Taliban had been ousted from power by the US. It withdrew its diplomatic staff from Kabul in August 2021 as the Taliban were advancing towards the Afghan capital. All right, that's all the time we have on this Friday edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend ahead. See you again on Monday.
They picked my husband. He was tortured there for 2 years. He was enforced disappeared. We had no idea where he is. Within 15 minutes, we got the information that the whole area is surrounded by Pakistan Army. I came out from